Hola, hola a todos, hola a todas. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a una nueva edición de VOR OnLive. Como ya saben, un VOR es un objeto que emite señales para que los pilotos de en la navegación aérea puedan mantenerse en la ruta correcta. Entonces, en ese sentido, VOR en Centro es una serie de intervenciones, de diálogos, de pláticas, para explorar diferentes problemas y diferentes temas a través de la creatividad. Hoy estamos muy contentos porque vamos a tener una conversación basada en un eje de centro, ¿no? Que es la tecnología. En Centro tenemos programas como la Licenciatura en Medios Digitales y otros posgrados en tecnología que ahorita seguro vamos a hablar de ellos, que tienen ese eje, ¿no? Un eje en donde la fusión de la tecnología y la creatividad son fundamentales. Entonces, les agradezco por estar aquí. Voy a cambiar a inglés porque nuestra conversación será en inglés para presentar a nuestros ponentes. So, hi, welcome to VOR OnLive. I'm going to introduce our speakers today, who are very special to us, and who are going to talk about creative technology and a lot of different variations using different softwares like Notch, Houdini, and Unreal Engine. First, of course, is our very own Roberto Cabezas, who is the chair of the New Media and Technology programs at Centro. So, hi, Roberto. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
And we have very special guests today. They're amazing technologists and generalists and amazing creators. They're probably going to talk more about their work in Savages. So we're going to welcome Ted and Alex, Ted Pallas and Alexandra Hartman from Savages. So, hi, Alex and Ted. How are you guys?
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining Roberto and joining the audience. They can, please, if the audience is listening, please let us your comments and questions in the chat for Roberto and Alex and Ted to engage with you. Thank you very much, both Alex and Ted, and of course, Roberto, for being here. We're very excited to listen about your amazing experience with creative technology and all this amazing software, all the things you can do.
Thank you, Gonzalo.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, guys, very welcome to VOR, and thank you so much for your time, for sharing. I think we have very different questions from our audience and from the students that are in the programs at Centro in terms of real-time rendering, why Notch, why Unreal, why Houdini, why Rhino, why so many apps.
Let's dig in. Yeah.
So please, I think we can start sharing your screen and your presentation. And everyone, if you want to have some questions, please shoot them at the chat you have. It doesn't matter if it's Facebook, YouTube, anything. I'll be bringing the questions for you guys.
Thank you.
So let me see if we can share the screen. Yeah.
So we were super excited to hear that you guys have similar software in your pipeline.
Yeah, basically our students share these specific softwares and a little bit more of them. And I think the most important thing we discuss is not about the software, it's about what you need to do. And
Exactly.
Great.
And that's you had just mentioned, I think, one of the biggest psychology points around all this work, which is why so many apps, or maybe for other people, why so few apps, right? Depending on how you're going to come at it. And it really is for us, this many apps is about our recipe for how much it takes to get the work done fast. We could definitely do all of our work inside Cinema 4D or probably even a Maya if we really had to, and then really commit to doing everything inside of an Unreal or a Notch. But in making that commitment, we're having to commit to maybe not learning the fastest and most effective way to do our work. So just to kind of put that in the orbit generally is the idea behind all of it is we're a commercial studio. And as a commercial studio, if we don't work fast enough to get the job done, we put our job at risk.
And also what tool is right for the job. Because I think something that we're looking at in the first 2 slides that we wanted to show you guys was that polygons and Nurbs are actually they can look very, very similar. So with your Houdini and your Rhino, your results, it's about the look you want, which is
and about how you want to get to the look, even like a Nurb versus a polygon. That's kind of a base level choice about how you're going to approach. Maybe if people don't know this out there, a Nurb thinks of geometry as like a spline, almost the way that Illustrator will think of that shape as like a line that you can change very, very openly, whereas a polygon model is more like a much specific thing, and that polygon has that specific relation to these other polys. So like that's why we opened with this, is that choice often is very design relevant, but because we're a real-time studio, it's going to be a polygon. At some point, it's going to need a map, right? It's going to need textures. It's going to need to be treated in the same way no matter what. So all of this work that we're looking at here in this slide funneled into Houdini at my workstation, and then in a combination of like HDAs and FBX files, went over to Alex's workstation. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that in Unreal.
Yeah, I'll probably talk more about that on the Unreal side, but what we were looking at
just to have at the beginning of the conversation, how do you define procedural design, and why this line of thought it's important in the work that you do?
Well, I think there's a lot of answers to that one. So when I think of procedural design and why it's important to us, it's about the speed of iteration and how you build your tools. So when you're thinking about, well, I'm more interested in the parametric design side of it.
So there's like, this is actually a really, I think, an interesting point to kind of pick at for just a second, alongside like procedural versus parametric, right?
Yeah.
So what we're looking at here, procedural design, we've actually got a really good presentation on the left and right side. I would say that the right side, those trees represent procedural design,
Houdini.
Parameterized, so that an artist could go and touch each individual tree if they wanted to at the end of the day, but the system can procedurally step through without any artist intervention after it's been configured and deliver all of these trees for us. And that's what we happen to be looking at here. This was a spec project, so I didn't go and like touch each individual tree for the perfect shot. We just got trees that look great and moved with it. On the left side, we've got parameterized design. If we focus on the wall that's in the middle, you can't see where I'm pointing. I'm just pointing at my screen. But there's this wall in the middle that has these slices cut out of it that are all a little bit different. And that might look procedural, but it's all actually getting the same noise snapshot. So I would say that that noise itself is a parameter of the design that we're configuring. So that's somewhere that I think people often get hung up in their head. And I just wanted to kind of rally on it, because often what we want to make is a parameterized design so we can iterate on it with our hands, which is kind of the opposite of a procedural workflow where we parameterize something so we can script it, whether we're using like a Houdini copy to points for each loop style scripting, which is how I go at it, or whether you're doing like a more formal, maybe open frameworks style scripting. That's really that procedural workflow is where it steps away from that parameterized definition. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that establishes that a correct line between the two ways of thinking and developing not only software, but creative systems. I like to think them in creative systems ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because like the software is just rasterizing an image, right? There's a million ways to approach that. So 100%, even within each of these softwares, we could maybe bounce to the next slide too. Within each of these softwares, that one that we were just looking at before. So it really wants to go forward. I'm sorry, but those gold kind of lands. I wanted to show that. I think that same height map.
Yeah, it is actually. So this is an example of
how to make this guy. And it's like a piece of cement that we 3D printed a mold for it. Maybe we can get it some more definition there, right? So that height map is also this thing that we're holding, and we've got a real-time virtual production set that we made out of it. And really, all of the design development went into Gaia. And about 8 hours went into Gaia, and then about 8 hours went into getting it into all these other forms. So
but
talking
Houdini
about like
what made that possible.
Procedurality and parameterizing, we made Procedural a relatively fixed map, and then worked with it in ways that were able to like present that fixed map as different geometries, right? So that going back to like, what is a procedural workflow? It's often about kind of like being like a hip hop beat maker or like a DJ, taking materials that you've made, right? And like sampling them into other materials that you're going to like produce, right? And kind of that like studio workflow loop, like computer music loop. That's the background that I come from, and I often feel like I'm still in that mindset of like bounce something to tape and then process it, and then bounce something to tape and then process it, and then like keep on going back and forth just so I can filter my way through what I'm looking at. Yeah. Cool.
So how we get to them is actually shown on the next slide.
Yes.
And this is just a little bit of a breakdown in the two different softwares that we kind of, or Ted really leads on, either the Nurb workflow or the Polygon workflow, but either way, they always end up in Houdini when we have to material them.
Yeah.
And usually that can be any of us sometimes.
Yeah.
So not all of them are created equal either.
Is now a good time to mention? I feel like now is a good time to mention that Houdini, we chose it super specifically because it's really great at, in addition to modeling and in addition to VFX simulation and in addition to all of this creation, it's also an amazing processing tool. And we had our awareness of it because of the Touch Designer software. So Touch Designer and Houdini are actually the same code base. Like the person who made Chops, which is what makes Touch Designer so great, also made Chops in Houdini. And so like a lot of the same very specific chops, stops, tops, sops language is present in both. And so I was immediately comfortable with it. I'm about to reveal something I'm a little bit shy about. I can't use Cinema 4D. I tried to use Cinema 4D for like 2 years, and UV unwrapping and Cinema 4D like makes me sweat and like the beads are pouring. And then I sit down at Houdini, and for whatever reason, it's like I feel like I've been, you know, home, right? So, you know, it really is about like, I think understanding when you're looking at all of these node graphs and all of these tools and all of these apps that if you're bouncing off of this, that's fine. Keep bouncing, keep on looking for what you're gonna land on and what's going to work for you and what's going to feel responsive as you work with it, because it's probably out there. There's so many different ways to approach the ideas that we're talking about today. That I just wouldn't want anybody watching it to think that this is the only way.
Yeah, I mean, because these pictures can look a little intimidating. And I didn't come from a computer background, like really email, you know, a couple of years ago, that was, all of it was confusing to me. So node graphs can honestly like they can be a thing, but it doesn't take long to really adapt to the pattern of them. And they're actually really, really, once you use them, you get very familiar with your tools pretty quickly. And it was really great to watch Ted's progress, which is ahead of mine in all of these, about 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And I really only focus on the finishing step and some like messing around for fun. Like nothing. And, you know, but it really didn't take so long for him to be.
This is a good segue into, while we're on this slide, just talking about maybe the differences between Grasshopper and Houdini before we wander away from it. Over the last couple of years, I guess something I've really learned is that like all of these node graphs, there's like a fundamental approach that they take to the idea of a list, right? And that's really where the differences between working with them come from. And so fundamentally, what's great about Rhino, and even though I love Houdini to the bottom of my heart, I'll open it every day probably until I'm not opening software anymore. But there's still something about the way that Rhino, everything is in a list always. It just is for doing operations across an entire stack of geometries or points or attributes or whatever, in a way that in Houdini, you have to build those tools, right? So if you have an idea in your head and it feels kind of architectural, chances are you can bludgeon your way to it in Rhino in about an hour and a half, is something that I've found, especially if the idea wants to repeat a lot. So when we are doing ideas where we want to be building repeats, like we could see, it's kind of hard to see, and we'll get a better image in a minute, but there's kind of a fancy facade behind all of those arches.
Oh yeah, it's just the next slide
and
actually shows these.
You know, that. So that fancy facade would have been, I don't want to say tricky to make in Houdini, but just like would have taken a little bit more time for me to put together in the mindset that I was in that specific moment. You know, in another specific moment, another specific mindset, I probably would have slapped that together in Houdini and kept on moving. But what's I think really important here is that building that ramp shape that's in the lower right, not the major ramp, but that minor ramp that the major ramp is built out of. It's kind of this curvy, swoopy shape. And what this is eventually going to be, I'm super excited because we're actually modeling this is a fountain. Like water is going to go down real quick. This fountain is a tribute to this unfinished indoor ski resort that's been in Meadowlands, New Jersey for about 2 decades that we see every time we go to one of these rental shops where we're going to go like put some gear together for a show or do some XR. We go past this giant thing. So this is an echo of that. But that ramp shape, making it in Houdini would have been tricky, right? It's not really a NURBS based tool. So it's not the first choice when I want to model some of those really organic hard surfaces just being really fast. So we did that work in Rhino. And then if we can go back one slide, the Houdini slides, what they illustrate is actually grabbing that specific chunk out of the overall Rhino file and then procedurally turning it into this asset, right? And then the render that we look at on the next slide contains like elements of all 3 files, right? So that's what's really great, I think, about real-time rendering and like being able to use all of this software to reach the fastest geometry is we reach this place like way faster than we did before, just to be entirely frank. Like this would have taken us maybe a week to put together. And I think we put this together in about 2 days for this talk. Specifically.
And what I'm curious is if you think about lists because of music, because I do find some relationships about patterns and how list behaves computationally.
Yeah, definitely.
Related to rhythm. And how do you study rhythm when you study music?
I think that's a really good connection that actually he's never made, but Ted picks up some things. Well, maybe you've made it. I don't know that I've remarked upon it the same. But like it definitely, he picks up some things that I don't necessarily think are as natural about that.
Yeah.
The music connection makes a lot of sense. Musician,
lists, and also jazz, right, is really present in all of that because, like, you know, coming from like an improvised music background, right, we have our internal lists, like our internal patterns maybe that we're gonna play a lot when we're just playing music, or like tempos that we're comfortable with, just like all the things that we know that we bring to that jam, right? Like it's not so different looking at a stack of different lists across a node graph and kind of negotiating relationships between them. Is this kind of weird like jazz composer place that I find myself feeling, where we're like trying to find spontaneous and vibrant relationships between essentially all of these lists of data that we can illuminate in ways that are like compelling to look at during a corporate presentation. To be frank, that's like a lot of what the work is. And yeah, taking that music approach to like, how do we sort this pattern in a way that completes the song is 100%.
Yeah, and I think actually a lot of Ted's work is really tied to music and its movement, which I think the next slide is where we start. Oh no, it's not, but we'll get there. There are a lot of slides that are driven by sounder activities.
Yeah, they're coming. This slide is actually maybe a little bit more mundane, and if the playback was smoother, you guys would see like Houdini is also just real-time tools in general. So we come from an events background, and events is like a really great place to work. But what we're finding now, working more in like film, video, TV, is that you need to be a little bit more rigorous when there's a camera around, right? So this was a tool that we made because we were maybe going to do some stuff with cars. And we wanted to know specifically how the hubcaps were going to look, going at different speeds and at different camera frame rates, just because that was a question that somebody asked and we had no idea. So we like quickly spun up a tool to visualize that. And it took about 45 minutes. And this was an opportunity, I thought, to talk about math and how the cool thing about learning Houdini, I think more specifically than the other tools, is that as you, especially with like procedurality and parameterizing both, like what you're parameterizing a lot of the time is a function value, like a variable value inside of a larger equation, right? So the ability to do math just kind of good, and to be comfortable like practicing math and like developing a relationship with math as a practice. You can combine that with Houdini and get around a lot of like the I don't know Houdini challenge that I think a lot of people face when they approach using it, maybe more than some other 3D software. But if you've got some other angles into VFX knowledge, like Houdini really does support using those as part of your overall learning process in a way that I didn't find Maya or Cinema 4D did.
Yeah, in terms of how do you learn math with a specific VFX in mind, or for animation, or
Yes.
for creative purposes specifically?
Yeah. So, okay, there's a really great book that I think that Gonzalo is going to email the name of to everybody. And it is, I've got it. I'm going to pull out my iPad. I'm going to pull out my Kindle just so I don't get it wrong. But basically, find a book that you like. That's what you have to do if you want to learn math. You got to study. It's not hard. That's the secret, is vector math. All of it's really simple. Like once I just got over myself and just learned the math that was in front of me, it took me about 3 months. But I'm going to tell you the name of the book that I used for all of this stuff.
The 3D math primer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is,
that's one of the books we recommend at the
game engine development.
Oh, good.
Perfect. Yeah, classic.
It explains why the math you learned when you were younger, it's very useful right now in aspect of VFX.
It's all high school level. That's the thing here. Everything we have to do in VFX, apart from dot and cross product, is high school level math, right? And even like I'm going to reveal here, it probably is high school level for most of you. In New York State, if you're not good at math, they'll tell you that you don't have to take math or science anymore after 10th grade. Just take all these art classes. Like people told me for 6 years that I was bad at math, right? But it's not true. I'm not. Like, look at the stuff that we could do. Math is actually easy, everybody. You should just get this book.
It doesn't matter what your teacher said at all.
Don't pick a book. Just pick this book. It's only 6 chapters. It's about 6 months to get through it.
You can get good at math, no matter.
It's just practice. There's problems at the end of it, and keep on doing them until you get the solution yourself. Like, don't look at how they got the answer. Just go and read the chapter again. Like, that's kind of the trick that I had to do. Is I couldn't look at answers because then I got lazy. Yeah, I just had to go back and read it.
We have one question here. Why did you decide to work on and specialize in procedural and parametric design?
Notes. Like, yeah, like if you didn't make it procedurally and like the edge bevel looks bad, like your host, you're so screwed, right? What are you gonna do? You're gonna like go load that file from a week ago, like before you did your edge bevel? No.
Yeah.
You're gonna work procedurally.
Yeah, we have a good example of that coming up in the deck too, where a big change was a very small change. Well, this isn't it, but
this is my favorite.
This is a fun one.
This is cloth simulation, everybody. It didn't. Yeah, this is we did cloth simulation to make the pepperoni land good.
Yeah, it's quick. It hits quick.
But yeah, really, it's just about notes and efficiency.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep on.
Yeah, I think you said iteration at the beginning of the talk.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing. When you can deliver 3 options to your client and let them decide which one is the best, that's a huge advantage.
Without so much pain.
With
a lot less pain than it happened before.
It's even not unreasonable to learn like the PDG system inside of Houdini and deliver 3,000 options. Like, why would you not work procedurally and parametrically if that's a reasonable?
Because then you have to sort 3,000 options is my answer to that. But I love that it does, that reasonable number as well.
Yeah,
it's super great. You can define it all. So the next slide kind of takes us to one of those examples of music, how we incorporate music into sound. But you're not going to hear the sound here, but it's a classic. I think it's Dean Martin. It's an old jazz song. I don't know.
You're nobody told somebody loves you. And this is on our Instagram if you want to hear the audio. But what was kind of fun here, we set ourselves the challenge to like do all of the cueing with forces. right? So all of the cloth systems are actually the same, and we only keyframed like how much the fan underneath each of these was on in like a very, very detailed way. And it was super, super awesome that we did this on an i7. I want to say this computer was built in 2016, right? Like a, mobile 1080, 64 gigs of RAM, like not really a box that you would imagine would be great at doing that kind of thing, but it sailed right through this project. So, you don't need a whole lot of box to start getting into it. You just need to like limit yourself creatively maybe to something that you can achieve, like for Flappy Arm Man.
And we could probably
but like this is the major experience that I gave myself before we started doing like some relatively big cloth sims on some projects this year in like a more intense way.
I'm just gonna call out before we go on, in the background you'll see a first expression of an HDA that you're gonna see a lot in here, which just drives home that iteration point. Not only is it awesome with parametric and procedural design to get those options on one project, but also to keep your library and build it. Like it actually does add value to your workflow in a way that I don't think a lot of these projects really, build in for the creative team. And when you're a small team, that can make all the difference. So I guess we're not quite to where I thought we were, but this we included because I really loved the expression that Houdini is actually able to get, even though I don't personally think of it as
this is
VFX or render.
This is like actually a Houdini viewport flipbook, where we just wanted to see like how much vibe and how much art direction we could do without actually formally hitting like render, right? And it turned out that it was about this much. But just like speaking to the point that Alex just made, like having the ability to think of your iteration phase, this is, I think, the other thing alongside notes that I wish I brought up before, right? Is like the LODs of iteration for sure. And some of our assets, like we use this SVGS planter.
It's coming. You'll see
all the time. I think that's like, I made that maybe 18 months ago at this point. And it probably sees use every other week. Just because like we often need a bin.
It's true.
To like put things in.
And it's changed. That's where the story about
it's gotten better. Like at this point, our planter is wicked.
Yeah.
It's the planter I imagine in my dreams.
The planter I want. But before we get there, this is a good spot to talk about why that planter is so great to us. This is an HDA that Ted made in Houdini, and we brought into Unreal and configured entirely in Unreal. So the layout,
the HDA is cool because what the HDA does, it works in like two ways. So I was joking earlier that like I might get into cross stitch and make us a cross stitch that says, in this house we don't bake lighting, right? Because if you bake your lighting, then you can't really move stuff around. So I'm bringing this all up because when you're working with HDAs and when you're working with geometry in Unreal Engine, you have to be super mindful, actually, of how all of this geometry comes in. And in Houdini, it might make sense to instance all of these hexes in a single node. So you can look at them all at once and configure their related spin. But then if you do that in the Unreal Engine, each one's light map is going to be about that big. Right, so the level of detail that you're going to get on the lighting response is going to be super, and it's going to look like a video game from 1999, and nobody's really going to be happy. So this HDA is super cool because we were able to configure the spin by having everything instance, and then we looked at our transform that we set for the spin, and then just duplicated that by hand. Over and over and over. It took about two minutes after we had looked at it for a few weeks and like decided that we liked it.
And you can tell this was quite a lengthy part of the presentation. So it was really easy to get through a major set piece,
and
actually.
Like it had to be able to respond
changed it quite a bit. And you can see the difference between a viewport render and the actual presentation on stage. And some of that lighting and how that works. So
just to make it clear for the audience, HDAs are like tiny Houdini programs that you design or create, and they can be open in Cinema 4D, Unreal Engine, Unity, bunch of applications that what they do is you open it in there, and then you have Houdini inside your app.
It's great.
For that asset.
My understanding is that too, like a lot of studios, their artists actually directly interface with Houdini through Maya. And since we just defined HDAs, I feel like it's a good time to mention that all of the engine implementations are different. So the Unreal implementation does not do dots. It doesn't do pops. It pretty much only does stops. So what that means is it doesn't do particles, it doesn't do simulations, it doesn't like break stuff by itself. It's a lot of work still to get all of those effects in, right? What Houdini really shines at in the context of Unreal Engine, believe it or not, modeling, right? And it's the ability to go and essentially like make that table a little bit bigger and get a squeaky clean UV map and everything is good and not have to leave Unreal Engine and you're still in the camera, because when you discover this stuff, you might be on set.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to work fast. Like we don't actually have the lens that we're going to be shooting with until we're shooting, and the number of times that it's been different, and especially in like the less big projects, like that's just the reality of doing the work, is it's on us to be able to respond.
Yeah, that's true. But we're going to see a lot more HDAs, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. So
everything.
Here
actually.
we brought back, we included this one because it has all those arches again, but like everywhere this time, as well as the planter. In a couple variations. And really, this was just an exercise to see how much we could get in. Foliage is notorious for being difficult to work with. Oh, and another expression of that Houdini digital asset being used for some artwork.
Yeah, and there's a cool story about the planter in the context of this one. So this is where we added a bevel to the edge of our planter on the top. And it was after we had already placed all of these. And so just to kind of frame the value of an HDA and working parametrically, which is the only way to use an HDA, really, right? And once you're working parametrically, it's just like one more P word and then you're procedural, just do it. So, you know, the bevel got added, and then to be put on every single planter all at the same time, all we had to do is like right click in the content browser and rebuild all of them. And then it re-imported the asset and put a bevel on everybody, right? Yeah. And like back in the day, that would have been a day for a junior artist to, you know, go and do. And we don't have junior artists too often. So it would have been a day for one of us to go and like redo all of this work that we had already just done. And that's not a great way to have to model. Yeah.
Super fun. And what's great about it, as well as with the foliage tools, which, I mean, Unreal does have a lot of powerful tools that sometimes are easy to bounce off of. But this was really practiced with the foliage brush, which, you know, I didn't realize the power of it until we were pretty, at least, I mean, a couple of months that passed when I wish I had been really
the foliage brush. Anybody learning Unreal should just go ahead and do a couple of days of just like focus time with it, because it really can instance a lot of things in a lot of very interesting ways.
Yeah.
Like you could also use it
for litter. Or some papers.
You know, artistic ceiling scatter, like, or making like facades. Like, there's actually a lot of very interesting work.
Here, this is, I guess, thank you, Giselle. This is perfect expression of the foliage brush.
Yeah.
We were tasked with a jungle setting, just kind of a rough placement where someone could stand. And this is just kind of looking at Unreal. You know, one of the other things that's super important besides your geometry, which is a lot of what Ted provides the studio, is, and the placement, here, light, atmosphere, and those post effects are so important to getting your scene to a place where it comes out of gamey. And I'm not even saying like, these are out of gamey. Like, they're still there.
Take a look on the left. Take a look at that bright yellow above the dark green. Like, just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, getting that in a scene would have been like, we did it, boys. Popping champagne, like everybody's going out for steaks. Like, but now it's just kind of
pretty quick and
very standard part of computing.
Yeah. Something I probably should have said too is these are mostly sketchbook shots, for the most part, unless they look like something that went out like the Dell slide had. But this is So these are still kind of in work, but it took about 10 minutes to get these done. So like the foliage brushes, just
we've been really all about measuring how long it could actually take to do these things, because the thing about virtual production that's really bizarre is that it takes like VFX from a process that usually starts kind of after, especially on an indie, after filming is already done.
Half an hour, sorry, for all of the people. I was thinking about it as you explained it. I was like, well,
got it, sorry.
We're a couple of parts.
Well, there were 30 minutes left, which is like about, so yeah, like VFX moves to the front now, and we have to have our work done before the camera turns on. And because that's true, we can also be working inside the camera. So when we talk about like, oh, this took so many minutes and this took so many minutes, that's cool because those are opportunities for expression while we're on set that are not risky. Right, because you want to be leaving room to like check everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean,
make sure it goes in the server well.
Optimization can happen. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, to people that are like getting into doing this work for themselves, I would say that like stopwatching tasks is actually a pretty important component, just so that when you're talking with like your VFX director or art director at the end of the night about the notes that you have to deliver for the morning, you can be realistic with them about what you can do.
It's easy to be unrealistic.
That's somewhere that we find our expectation is like frequently mismanaged.
Well, and also I've been guilty because I do the functionality with Unreal, and I mean, this isn't really that, and we're not really showing you that, but you know, there are times that Unreal just behaves like in an unreal fashion, and you've got to pick out the knots that you didn't know were there. And sometimes, I mean, usually it's operator error, but there's also product, just things can appear. Construction scripts are something to be wary of, like especially if you're going to sequence cues. There's all sorts of things that start going into functionality, so we do like to keep track of that time just all over.
Yeah.
So, but this slide, we don't do so many effects, and unfortunately we didn't include so much Niagara, but this is an example of it as well.
Well, we
just didn't pull the slides. I'm sorry, I just didn't pull enough of the slides.
Yeah.
But this is an example of it, and then the next slide is actually an example of a post effect, just slapped on top of a look. Scene built out 3D.
That's a cool, I think a cool
super
place
easy,
to spend a minute.
Fast.
That's a cool place to spend a minute is the difference between like special effects, VFX, post effects. So special effects, just to get that out of the way, is like a blood packet or something. Like you got shot on camera and there's actually like a ketchup packet that shoots out some blood and the camera shoots it. That's special effects. Visual effects happen like in the frame, but they're composited in, they're not actually there on set. So like you can't go touch it, right? And then post effects typically happen to the final frame, kind of like out of the world of the frame, right? And so like we're looking at this city, but we're looking at it on a piece of paper, and then it turns into this monochrome thing. So like the piece of paper and the monochrome thing are their own world and their own effects negotiation, but like the content that they're shooting did get shot. Right, so like all of that would also be its own visual effects process. So like having a good language, I think, around all of this stuff has been really helpful for us in particularly collaborating like on sets and working with directors and being like, VFX is SFX is actually a phrase that I found has resonated with people in a way that like this is what extended reality is, just doesn't. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, so this is a sequence book, which
what would be the main role you guys get hired for? Because
extended reality is visual effects as special effects. Yeah, and then post sometimes also as post effects, but live during shooting. Like it all just happens all at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm mostly doing the functionality and setting up those scenes and making the things move.
Yeah.
And this is where we transition time to Notch. So again, we're seeing some Houdini geometry, just brought in, materialed in there. But really since we're back on this one, we have a special trick that you'll notice there's no repeat in the scatter of the ground material. We decided to do a Houdini trick. So that was really, really fun challenge for Chet.
Kind of a neat trick going on there is like applying multiple Houdini maps, and like you could use Houdini to think in just really bizarre ways about your geometry. And so what we ended up doing is like reflecting the ground a millimeter above itself, and we apply just a very sparse scatter. And then we reflect the ground another millimeter above itself, and we do another one. And so we're within Notch's tolerance for not having like funny Z issues, right? And things flashing and clipping, but we're also low poly enough that this is all kind of working for us, right? And I think that's a really good point to be bringing up, Alex, is that like you can kind of have ideas that might feel really terrible, but you can validate them and find out if they're good or not. And this one panned out to be good when it works, right? And other packages just don't quite enable the same like validation loop that Houdini, because of the Houdini engine and its ability to just export everything else.
Yeah, or the flexibility to try things and see if computationally they work or don't. Like most of the things, we are not sure if they are gonna work really.
Well, a lot of it is experimentation, which is great because then, like, I mean, that greenhouse was where I learned that I really needed to learn about optimization, like really seriously. And it was great because then it kicked off an entire new line of how we treat everything in our scenes. And actually, I see Berto Mora in the comments, and he suggested he said a couple of words to us about level loading. And
it's different.
Oh, and it is a different beta. Well, I thought it was. And I got a great recommendation from someone, just a couple, one sentence can just really trigger everything at the right time. And
this is a good too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You were saying earlier, design is deliverable, right? Yeah. So like what we do right now with extended reality is really different from what a set designer would do for an event, because a set designer would like draft a set, and that would be the set designer's deliverable, and they would hand it to a TD and a production manager who would then hire a crew to build it, right? So there's like levels between the set designer and the finished thing that prevent them from really, I think, like being able to say that they built that set, they made the set, right? Whereas with extended reality, like, no, you built that's in the camera, actually. You made the finished thing now. So like you have to understand what you're making and like optimize it and just kind of own it as a production designer in a way that we haven't really had to in some of our other contexts. Like when you're baking finished media for a stage, it's a very different and just set of parameters.
It is, especially because a lot of people think real time is an instant response to notes as well. So it's really great. The more you know your program and what you're building for yourself, the better you can actually react to anything.
Yeah.
And that's just really, really important on site.
And here we have another question. It says, where do you get inspiration to create the different virtual scenarios you design?
The different. So for me, it is like applications of the math that I'm learning, right? And then like this is something that I think about a lot as a designer, is what do I want to take in as influence? I love most of the things I look at, so I actually can only look at a little bit, right? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to become a parrot if I expose myself to just like too much work.
I do the same.
So I like love to look at the work of our colleagues, because the real-time graphics community is so broad and so fertile and so diverse in how it approaches things, that like I'm able to be inspired by the different techniques that I'm seeing people around us use in, both like this direct kind of extended reality world and then like VFX and gaming. But like really what I'm doing is I'm just trying to filter that through things I'd already seen kind of like in my youth, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, and I mean, I do functionality now, but I came from sweater design, which is really very pattern based. And it's just really natural. What's the most efficient way to get to where you want to be? So like the
relationships when by coming from fashion to technology, it wasn't like an easy change or what?
I'm sorry. What
was it? Like an easy change from
no. Well, for me, actually, yeah, because I was really shy. Like I'm still pretty shy, and I don't go out and talk to the community. So there are much better ways to learn than I did. which was very much at my computer, like looking at forum posts angrily for like 7 months, 16 hours a day. So no, it wasn't hard, but it was a lot. And I think really, you know, if you like patterns and if you enjoy a puzzle, you're not gonna bounce off it. But really, that's like the only secret of learning Unreal is just hanging on until everything makes sense, because it's really not complicated. And functionality is really just about understanding your essential building blocks. And it's really where parametric design becomes very, very important. And what we do overlaps, because you're kind of building functionality for a set with your parameters. And I'm building a yes, no, or a float, a vector, sending a different coordinate for something to move to. They're very similar. It's just about passing that information around. So yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know if it's inspiration as much as just curiosity.
No, it totally is.
Curiosity.
It's inspiration related, because what we both dance around saying, I think, is it can be really frustrating as an artist to take a very direct visual inspiration and then try and make it. Because like working in Unreal, working in Houdini, working in Notch is very much more like software development than After Effects. Like there are very few paintbrushes that you can grab and just make the thing that's in front of you. You have to actually kind of like render it in the world. You have to model it.
Yeah. But we do a lot of research for material. Like there are things that do get a lot of time in the real world, but yeah, I guess it's all relative.
And we have one question here related to that. That's when working with Houdini and Notch, which were the biggest challenges? What are the basic principles someone should consider when having this workflow?
Okay, so the basic principle that helped me the most was take your work to paper. And this relates to learning math, which is like, don't try and understand the math in the software that you're learning. But what you're learning in Notch and Houdini very specifically is going to be math related more often than not. Like there's only a handful of nodes here on this graph. And when we hit play, they're going to disappear and it's going to go full screen. But it's good that we're paused because we can see that that's all the nodes that are here, right? So you have to like...
It's very efficient. It's thinking about the efficiency.
Yeah. It's easy to be boring. You know, so by like taking your work to paper sometimes and you're trying to figure something out, and just relating your work in a way that you understand in a different context can be really helpful for sorting out the challenge that's immediately in front of you so you can illuminate a path to your work. Yeah.
That's the same with the functionality in Unreal.
Yeah.
I mean, not that.
Yeah. And how do you do to adapt the workflows and new version of software? Do you have like a special defined pipeline where you stick to it and you don't update between projects? You don't update in 1 year? How do you deal with it?
Major project, don't update anything.
Yeah,
like when you're between like invoices, like the starting invoice and like the closeout invoice, like you don't update your software, right?
And we don't.
But outside of that, you should always update your software to the most recent versions when it's made available, the moment it's made available.
We think so.
If you're on modern hardware, because like realistically, a lot of this software, the technologies are more integrated than they were maybe 10 or 15 years ago when we set a lot of our habits.
No,
right?
That's entirely true, especially this year and next year.
Like you're not just updating Houdini with that, you're also updating your OpenCL implementation. And maybe you just got like 3% more processor response, which is awesome. You know, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what could be a good advice for people that's listening to put together a shop like yours? Because you are not a huge shop, you're like a generalist that specialized kind of shop. How do you get your first client? How do you put together on the market? And because you guys told us that some of the work that you do depends of a bigger agency sometimes.
A lot of times. I think we should start this because you started.
Yeah, so it's about like you. I hate to say it, but you have to just say that you do a thing to people who you think will hire you to do the thing. That's the secret to like starting a creative studio, right?
For a very long time.
And so like you might hear that and say like, oh, that means I've got to know some. No, that means you have to meet them. actually. I didn't really know anybody. My family doesn't really do creative work like this, right? You know, I'm coming into this a little bit different from some of our colleagues in this space. Yeah. So I can vouch for, like, you can just knock on doors very literally. You can email agencies very literally. You can do work that you're really proud of and that you stand behind and that you're open to hearing critique about. Because when you do commercial work, that's what you're really signing up to do. I think we've seen a lot of people drop off as we were going through our 20s who just, like, thought they were working to be artists. Like, if you're in this kind of commercial space, especially as a generalist, you're not. Like, we are, but we are hired to do the work that we're hired to do, which is, you know, not a compromise, but like that's what the collaboration is actually rooted in, is everybody coming together to do somebody else's work.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good point for starting a small shop, is that, I mean, it's obviously, it was way smaller and, you know, we've gone through a lot of changes, but one of the things that's super important is that when you're doing corporate work, maybe especially, even if the work is not your passion, making the project and the process good for your team should be. Because if that's your passion, then it's going to be successful, because it's very stressful and it's hard to get those clients. And they don't always go through, even when they say they want to. And I mean, like, money is money, budgets are budgets. Coronavirus, like, that we all saw what happened. So like, there's other things to pin your success to. And for me, that's what it is. Does it make it, is it great for the team, and is the team happy to be together?
We could go to the next,
then I'll keep working.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, I mean, they're just kind of there.
And we have an interesting question from Javier Treviño that he says, I really like procedural workflows, but I'm interested in characters. My approach has been using pre-made assets from the Unity stores. Do you guys know any other approach to this? And I bring this question because there is so many interested in bringing this kind of work to characters. We have some students that have achieved some of it, but I'm not sure if you know some new ways of thinking about characters in terms of procedural workflows.
Knowing your math, right? This comes back to that, is like, if you can think about a character rig from the perspective of what that rig actually is, which is relationships. Like, I've rigged things up in Notch. I think we made an owl summer before last that had like a black trax, and it would sit on your arm, and you could bring another black trax over to it, and it would kind of react a little bit. And all of that was rigged up natively in Notch, and like, you wouldn't really be able to tell necessarily that we rigged it there. It was just like a kind of a mediocre owl rig, I think, would be more the note. But, you know, as far as going procedural, like, there's the new KineFX toolkit, and Houdini 18.5, as far as I know, is very literally the first, like, fully proceduralized, we'll keep up with your geometry changes way of doing it. But the thing about characters is that you're, like, at some point still, like, computing does have limits, and you do have to kind of bake your mindset and make a decision. And it might be when you're about to, like, biharmonically capture the femur for film, you know, like that might be where you're kind of committing. Yeah.
And in terms of infrastructure, do you have like tons of workstation at your disposal? Do you work in a budget for?
I'm so glad that I'm so glad you asked. We should mention that we have a very small studio, but we have great collaborators, and we have had years of working with people, Ted especially, and as well as training up two really great people that, and I mean, we're working with a lot of different people to, you know, build that team a little bit more. But no, I've mostly been on laptops, just really nice laptops. And Ted's got a great workstation.
We have one, like, dual Xeon, you know, 6,000 card in it, like, workstation. But in general, it's just the biggest laptop that's available when the old laptop is no longer cutting it, because we have to move around a lot. So we might have a show rent something, and this year we're not moving around so much. I just want to address Beto in the chat.
Me too, since I got your name wrong.
Very seriously, I keep on hammering with math, because, like, game dev is a math discipline, and real-time graphics is a branch of the game dev tech tool set. and like a major point of frustration for ourselves over the last decade, and now more recently the people that we're like working with and training up in the way that we do stuff is the kind of disconnect between like, this might be a more American issue than not, but like the kind of math education that we got and like the math applied realities that we need to bring to the table to actually get the work done, right? And I know that it sounds like I'm hitting a hammer, but I'm doing it kind of deliberately, right? It's like, that's the most important thing about all of this work is how you're going to make it. It's going to be sine waves, trigonometry, and super basic pre-calc, and that's it. It's just you have to be comfortable reaching into it, or else every time you do, it's going to be kind of sweaty and stressful and like not very procedural.
Yeah. To start closing our conversations, can you talk a little bit about the virtual production work you do in these last times?
Yes.
Yeah, so we've gotten to go out on 2 exciting shows for virtual production. In the first one, we were responsible. Ted was the creative director for everything, set and effects. It was really exciting, and
yeah, that was for Dell. We did like the Dell Technology
I guess you saw the picture of that one.
Yeah. And then we can't talk about the one that we just did because it's about to come out. Like it was supposed to come out a couple of days ago, but I think it'll be out in a couple of days instead. But generally, there's a lot of like Netflix stuff calling up, and a lot of like blue chip level corporate meetings.
Yeah, it's interesting who's getting excited about XR, and I think that there's going to be a future in it, even when people are able to go out again. We really love virtual attendance.
Yeah,
just as a rule as a studio. Yeah, it's really great. So join us.
And it's becoming a big thing.
Right? I mean, it's so exciting. That was the last. We were like, yeah, that's a great tool.
Yeah, EmberGen is great. Just because
it's outside of what we talked about. Yeah.
This is like a really great explosion tool. It's I think it's going to be the go-to explosion tool for general purpose exploding, especially in like an Unreal Engine context. They have a relationship with Octane now too, so I think that their tool might be popping up inside there also. If you're thinking you'll have to explode stuff, it's the way.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool. It's a very powerful tool, and I think you get it with your Octane license.
Cool.
And even if you don't, the value is super high. Like it's one of the more approachable specialized tools. Is why I wanted to mention it. Is a lot of the more specialized tools can feel like, if you want to buy RealFlow, it's like $2,000, which could be a lot, right? It could feel like a ton. But EmberGen is the opposite of that. Yeah, they're awesome.
I know we're almost out of time.
I don't know if you have something that you want to share to close this conversation. I think it has been very informative in terms of what to do, how to use it, and I know there was a little bit of technical talk, but I think it's very important for artists to get related to this kind of language, to get your math together, as Ted says. I think it's the kind of thing that really opens your mind to new possibilities.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it makes things possible. And you don't know what's possible sometimes until you know.
Yeah. So thank you guys for your time and for sharing. And for all the audience interested, we're going to be sending you links for you to get to know more about Savages and Savages Patreon, and Savages recommendations for you to learn and become a better artist, a better technologist, a better creator in general.
Well, thank you. Like, I wanted to say goodbye, like in the name of Centro. Thank you, Roberto, for hosting. Thank you, Ted and Alex. That was like an exhaustive introduction. Excellent for people like me who are not well-versed, like to see all the range of amazing projects you can do and amazing things you can do with simple math, yet determination and obviously a creative mind like all of yours. So thank you all. Please, to anyone who would want to who is not registered for the talk, please leave your email in the comment section, and we can send you a follow-up email with the recommendations of Alex and Ted, some quotes, and we'll do a follow-up so you can get all the information. Follow us on social media. Please follow Savages on social media. Follow Roberto Cabezas on social media. And join us. This is our last board of the season, but next year, we hope we can begin with very other interesting talks on technology and creativity and other issues that will be amazing. We hope to have Savages in Mexico in person whenever we can. It would be amazing to meet you. You could be inspired in Mexico, which will probably be great.
Really great.
Yeah, when it's possible.
Thank you so much. All
Thank
of
you so much for your generosity, your time.
It was great, and I'm sure that people learned a lot, and that we'll get a lot of interesting technologists from Centro, because Roberto is on that.
Awesome.
So thank you all.
Thank you very much for sharing and putting together and showing that what we teach, what we believe, it's on the market right now.
Exactly.
Keep at it. It totally is. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good one.